Great. Welcome, everybody. I'm due to technology, I'm assuming there's people out there listening. We are here, we are here, we are here. So this is our first designer forum after 19 months. And so part of the questions will be, do we remember how we designed this show? Because it was a long time ago. But I'm sure we do. So a little background on the piece. La Cage aux Folles began its life in the early 70s as a French farce live on stage. It ran for years, and in the late 70s, it was turned into a film adaptation starring the actor who played Zaza and who also played it on stage for so long. It was a huge hit in the 78, I believe, maybe 79. In 84, it was adapted once again into a musical by Arthur Lawrence, Harvey Fierstein, and Jerry Herman. And it ran for a very long time. It won the Tony for Best Musical. It was later adapted into another film version called The Birdcage with Robin Williams and Nathan Lane. So it's had a long life, this show, for various reasons and for at various times in our history. Different parts of the show stood out to make it relevant, and I think it's still relevant, if not maybe a little bit more relevant at this time. And we can go into why maybe later on the question and answers if you're interested. But one of the things about this show when it first appeared on Broadway was that it was the first mainstream Broadway musical featuring a story where the main protagonists were a gay couple, middle-aged, essentially married gay couple. And the creators of this piece were very, very nervous that it would be accepted on the stage by a New York Broadway theater-going audience. And there were a couple of things that they built into the show in order to maybe make it, in their minds before it opened, make it palatable so that your mainstream bridge and tunnel crowd wouldn't go fleeing back to New Jersey. One of them was they had 15 or so Cagelles in the company, and of those Cagelles, about 4 of them were women. And the thinking behind that was that they felt like if husbands are being dragged to this by their wives and the men are finding the men in drag attractive, they might get really nervous, but if they know that some of them are women, it will let them off the hook. And so that's why these women are in the chorus at that time anyway. And so the reveal when they pull off their wigs showed the men that maybe the one they found attractive was a woman and they were safe. I don't know what that thinking was. But anyway, that started that tradition of having a mixed genders in the Cagelles. Another was that the 2 men did not kiss at any time in the show, even at the very end. That was added in a subsequent revival. The curtain went down on them, and so there was no they were trying to erase anything they thought could be a threat. What turned out to have happened actually was once they got to the song in the Sand, when the 2 men sing a song about their young love and when they first met, they realized the audience was completely caught up in the story and that there was going to be no problems. And so the show became actually a huge commercial hit, and all of their fears were not at all founded. So that was very interesting, but that was also a time in '84 where it was a very revolutionary musical for that time. It also came in right as the AIDS epidemic started, and there are many stories on how the AIDS epidemic really did work its way through a good portion of that original company. There's a lot of stories about shows in the 80s going through that. So it developed a political bent, and the song I Am What I Am became a sort of anthem about individual expression. And so there's a lot of good, juicy history in this farce. one of the things that there were a couple of things I always felt were problematic for me. One of them was I always felt that Jean-Michel, the son, was a challenging character because I felt that what he was asking of his parents was really unreasonable, selfish. And in the earlier versions of this story, Jean-Michel was played by a much older actor. In Birdcage, he's like in his mid-30s. And when when Jean-Michel is in his 30s and he's asking his parents to completely deny who they are, it's pretty rude. So I felt that the key to that was to hire an actor who was really young, so that they're so caught up in the love for Anne that they don't really, that character doesn't really understand what he's asking, which lets him off the hook a little bit in storytelling purposes. And it makes the play, it gives the play more focus about what parents are willing to do to ensure their children's success or happiness. What are they willing to give up? What are they willing to put aside for the sake of their children? And so it became to me a play about family, any set of parents and their children. I mean, even the Dindons, the conservative family that's marrying into this family, ultimately decide, well, they're kind of coerced, but they ultimately decide to do what's right for their daughter and let the two young people be in love and get married. And so to me, it was an affirmation on family. What is a family? The Cagels, all the backstage people at La Cage aux Folles are part of this big family. And so it really, to me, became an exploration on family and parents and children. The fact that it was set in a drag club made it fun, very glamorous, but truly the story had more heart to me than just focusing on that element of the show. So to start with kind of the big feature, well, they're all big features, but the big feature of how do you stage it? The original show, of course, is on Broadway, huge wagons, giant traveling drops, lots of, they did these swipes where like one set would slide over as another set would come on. And these sets were huge, massive numbers of Cagels, massive numbers of costumes, lots of furniture, locations. And so the challenge of any big show like that, if you're going to reconceive it, is how do you continue to tell the story well, and yet you don't have the resources or the ability to do it the way it was originally done. We were fortunate in that the Meunier Chocolate Factory in London did a revised version of this with Doug Hodge, and eventually in New York with Kelsey Grammer and Doug Hodge. And their solution to that was, because their theater is not terribly bigger than our theater, was to set the entire show in the club. And they also decided for that production and that revival that the club would no longer be a huge Moulin Rouge style French cabaret review, but it would be in a rather seedy little club with a very small number of chorus performers. And what that did was it took all the pressure off of these giant sets and giant everything, and made it so that the budget can be small as part of the storytelling. And so once we realized that version is really fantastic. Sean Fanning, who's here for me, I don't know where he is for you guys, but hi, Sean. I haven't seen you in almost 2 years.
I know. It's just like the time flew by, but it also feels like it's been forever.
Yeah, exactly. Sean and I started talking about how can we do this show in our theater. And the solution we came up with, I think, is really great. And it sat empty in a deserted theater after one preview until last week. And that poor set was just this thing that was just sitting there going, please, please light me, do something on me. But we stood by it, and there it stood, and now it's in full glorious function. So Sean, I'm trying to remember what our first conversations were like as we started trying to conceive how this show was going to move on this stage.
Well, I think that I think the first thing we talked about, yes, was saying it in the club, but also trying to find some kind of a location that felt like it was an extension of the theater. You know, so it's not like we're trying to fit a gigantic club set onto the tiny stage. So it really was sort of like a toy theater idea. And then we also sort of talked about the convention of drops, both drops for the acts in the club, but also drops. I'm putting air quotes around it because we ended up not doing drops really for the other location. And so that it feels sort of like when we go to the realistic locations of the show, the apartment or the promenade or whatever, that those actually feel like they're within the club set. And so there's something sort of meta theatrical about doing that.
Right.
That both of us found interesting. And
also,
then we also talked, oh, go ahead.
Also, the club had to have architecture that would serve not just as a club, but as an apartment or a promenade along a beach wall or a backstage. And so, so the architecture had to be specific to all of those locations and yet function individually as for those locations. And
also still feel like La Cajupo, and like that there's something iconic about that, so that it can't be this neutral, super neutral thing. So it has to kind of be multiple things at once. We also talked about projections in that early meeting because we had just used a lot of projections for the first time for Rock of Ages. And so both of us were interested in taking that idea and finding a way to create a more unlimited selection of drops than we can afford, you know, at Cygnet Theater. If we were painting or printing them, you can still only get like maybe 3 or 4 before you just start to lose space. And of course, like rigging drops in there is expensive. And so projections, because Cygnet had just purchased this really nice projector, really nice projection screen, we knew that we were set up for that. And so it just seemed like the obvious answer here. And I can show a couple of the early renderings on the screen share if that would be better than talking about it.
And there are a lot of curtains in this show, which help also delineate space. There's shears and purple velvets and all sorts of things. Yes, these are the early ones.
But I think we sort of started with like, so what does the club look like? And, you know, I kind of wanted to go with this color palette that could allow brighter costumes, JBG's really bright, vivid costumes to sort of pop without being a black and white set. And so I tried to stay with like the gold and some beige and sort of that teal peacock color so that the costumes could really jump out and be interesting with it. And as you can see, this was older. This is before we cut a few things. What we actually ended up with more of a just doing this with projections, which was fine and it worked great. But just being able to like reverse the perspective of first we're on stage and now we're backstage. And, you know, which is an old trick that we used on a few shows at this point.
And the flats, that idea we used for Gypsy, the backwards facing flat. What we found is we didn't have any room off stage for them to slide off. So there's now a main drape, and the main drape serves that same function to crop the eye in to the purple sheer. We also found we have no room. We have no room for that clothes rack, so that got cut. There were a lot of things that got cut because there just was no room.
We had all these props that had to happen for the apartment, and so there really had to be space back there for those to come on easily. And so when you go to the apartment, then all that architecture becomes supporting of that projection image, and so it feels less like a drop and more like it's real. And then when we go to the promenade or promenade, that's an old picture. There we go. That was better. I revised it a couple of times, so I had gone from that to that, which was much
Right,
better. Then that architecture starts to feel like it's sort of a portal or an opening out into the exterior. And so we feel like we can be all those locations using the same set. So we were really just trying to get the most mileage out of the scenery as possible with as few things moving as possible. We really use those curtains as a transitional element. And so we could close them, when we were going backstage into a club or when we were sort of crossfading from the club to the apartment. And that also helped us preset some of the apartment furniture behind the curtain so that then the curtains open and we just pull them downstage. And so it all had like a good functional rhythm to it, I thought.
Right. Yeah. And in order to facilitate the furniture moves, we built the music that covers the scene changes anyway, because the show was written for giant wagons to do all its thing. So we had music to cover it, but we then choreographed it. We turned them into numbers, basically, these scene changes. Another thing that happened was the projections. In order for those projections to have a wide enough shoot, we had to bring the camera to a certain location in order to hit the screen. And in the past, our orchestra was up in a balcony, but now we needed the balcony in order to get the wide enough shot. So they got crammed under the balcony for that one preview, and it was truly hell on earth. There was literally no place. I don't know how we even got to that one show. There was no place to change clothes. There was nothing. So over the year and a half that we had to look at that, I had remembered that when we first moved into Old Town, previous companies had put their orchestra downstairs in the green room and mic'd it up into the house. And since we were miking from the balcony anyway, we explored it, and that is where they are now. So we moved them downstairs. So now the cast has the full backstage, which I swear I don't know how we did it the other way. But a technical thing we discovered is that when the band was upstairs, you not only heard them in the house through the speakers, you could still hear them through the curtain. And so it made for a slightly muddy sound. Maybe muddy mostly to a sound designer, but it was still a muddy sound. Now, because they're completely downstairs, everything comes through the speakers exclusively, and the sound is crystal clear. And so we're going to continue to do this for all future musicals, keep them down. They also like it. It's a little more humane. They're like down there. We're in the real downstairs with everybody. So that was a fabulous discovery to be made. Yeah, so I think we found a good solution, Sean. I do. I think the show flows really well, and there are times when in fact, JVG actually designed little green sparkly costumes specifically for the costume changes. So as if there weren't enough costume changes, we designed some costumes just for the scene changes. So we went a little nuts, I think. But
well, you told me, I remember you saying, oh, they're going to need a schmata to throw on because they need to come out and the Kajals have to change the scenery. And I was like, a schmata? Are you kidding me? They've just worn like these huge like headdresses and these fabulous outfits and the yellow fringe number, and then you want them to come out in a schmata? And I was like, I think we can do better. Give me a sec. So
well, when we did pageant,
yes,
we used the original costumes from off Broadway that Greg Barnes designed. And the girls, the contestants, had to do a spokesmodel. Each one had to do a spokesmodel spot. And rather than a full costume, they had this fluffy, ruffly schmata. And we thought, that's where I got that idea. I'm like, well, we could do like that. In fact, maybe we still have them, only they were like 25 years old and pretty disgusting. So the answer was no, but I think that's where that idea came from.
Yeah.
Is pageant.
Yeah, even though they're green and sequined dresses, we still call them schmatas backstage. Yeah. That's what Sarah calls them, the wardrobe person. She was like, and here's the schmatas.
Before I move on to you, Sean, is there anything you want to add to where this set came from? And
sure.
You haven't seen the show yet, have you?
Not for 2 years, or not for like a year and a half. Yeah, unfortunately, I couldn't rejoin the whole rest of the team during this sort of tech revival process because I was just so busy teaching up in North Coast College.
And it was done. So
yeah. I mean, I felt like it needed to be dusted off. There was some rigging stuff that had to be addressed and everything, just to make sure that it was safe and ready to come back to life. But I mean, I thought the process, it was interesting for me because it was my first real full projection design. And so when you see the show, you're seeing images that I built on Photoshop. And I had a programmer with me because I don't know how to program the projections or the crossfades or anything like that. And so we had all that stuff like pre-built, and we were like really close. There were just like a couple cues I think that you had to fix during tech, a couple things you had to get rid of because they didn't work. And then of course the pandemic hit, and it was just like crap. But I was really proud. I'm very proud of the projection designs because I think that that's like a new dimension to what I have been able to do at Cygnet, and I really tried to make them work with the set in a way that the architecture could inform the projections and vice versa. So I'm really happy with how all that came out.
JBG, the endless parade of one fabulous costume after another. You had 19 months off, and it seemed like you had a lot of dreams about what else can I do? Whereas we just kind of tightened the curtains and dusted the set, you've been sewing. I had this joke that if you sat still too long in the theater, you were going to run up and sew sequins on me. So I'm like, nobody was safe from the bling.
Nobody was safe.
I mean, there's so many frigging costumes to talk about, but part of that's built into the crafting of the musical, that there are two large numbers that have multiple costume changes in each of those numbers. So that's a requirement right there.
Yeah.
Where did we start? I don't remember where we started.
Well, I think where we started was looking at, I don't tend to spend a lot of time looking at what's been done before in previous productions because I don't want it to necessarily color very much. Like I always feel like any piece of theater, if you're going to do it the way somebody else has done it already, like kind of what's the point? Like, so this is like, what's our take on it? What story are we telling it? Like what is the perspective from which Sean and the rest of the team at Cygnet is going to approach this? So having said that though, I'm a real history nerd like you. And so we talked a bit about prior productions and, sort of how that came out. And looking at it, we really discovered that there's really only two costumes that are called for in the production. And that is the Bird Ballet and the Can-Can. And part of that is because the music is very specific.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it
has to be that.
Yeah, it is called the Bird Ballet. You can't just suddenly decide that you're going to have, I don't know, hippopotamuses in tutus, or you can't just decide like, this is where I want to throw my country western number. Like the music is a bird ballet.
But those are great ideas.
Right? So the Disney Fantasia already did the hippo in a tutu, so that one's been done. But so we had to do the bird ballet and we had to do the can-can, but it was sort of like, what everything else we could take an escape from. I think that we were talking about the original opening costumes and how they were kind of these loose pajama kind of looking things, and then they were
big huge robes.
Yeah, they were big.
They flew out.
Right. They were big big capes, and then the capes come off and then they're in like pajamas, and then the pajamas come off and they're like in little sailor suits, and none of that made sense to me because it didn't look like 1970s when the show was written, like late 70s or early 80s. None of that seemed appropriate or was like really giving us anything. But also none of it was showcasing a female figure. So if the whole point is supposed to be the number is supposed to be about this confusion, like you don't know, you can't guess the gender. And it's like, well, if everybody's in a box or a big old shapeless whatever, of course you can't.
Because they're covered.
Right. So it's much, you know, let's figure out, let's how we get some leg in here, and you know, who's, you know, how do we actually make them look like that female silhouette, and you know, and have fun exploring that. So I think that's where we started from, and then really wanting to have that kind of 70s sort of flavor to it, like leaning into that, and that's really where it began, and then it all kind of snowballed.
But part of that, and Peter will talk about this when we get into the wigs, but we're also like, what era are we going to set it in? And when was the height of the drag that we're showing? This is not a RuPaul drag show by any means. This is old school. And I forget Danny's last name. Do you remember that? Danny LaRue, world famous at the time, maybe not as much now, but world famous female impersonator. He always swore he was a female impersonator, not a drag queen, that he was playing a character. And always sang a song in his man's voice at the end of every bit, because he was always trying to make sure the audience knew that he wasn't trying to fool you. But he was brilliant, and he was elegant, and he was very like 60s, early 70s. And we found a couple of documentaries about drag in the late 60s, early 70s. And so that, I think, is when we started zeroing in on the style that we were going to go for. It was a more elegant look. It was not the over the top performance art kind of thing that it is now. And it really, I think, informed a lot of our early decisions.
And a lot of that went in with hair and makeup too.
Right.
Like Peter, Peter came up with a ton of really great research. So with like some very period kind of looks and sort of the evolution, because what we think of as drag now is really, really different than how it was, you know, 40, 50 years ago.
Right. And there was an innocence to it. Now it can be deliberately political, and it can be performance art, which makes it fascinating. But back then it was very innocent. And Peter found this documentary, The Queen, I think it's called, and it's about a beauty pageant in the mid 60s. And the simplicity of what the drag performers were doing really inspired us. Like, for instance, the makeup that we use is not the wicked over the top makeup you see today.
It's contour and all of that.
Yeah, it's very inspired by, and I'll let Peter talk to this further. In fact, the wigs and the costumes are so like entwined together that we probably should just talk, all three of us, about the same time. They truly are. The one without the other doesn't work. One of the features that the audience may not be aware of that has to do with the wigs and the reveal of the gimmick in the show, where the performers take off their wigs at the end of a number to reveal their true gender. That is actually something that was specific to French drag performers at first. It was a law, because it was illegal to pass yourself off as the opposite gender. And so a performer whose job was to pass themselves off as the opposite gender had to prove to the audience, show them their actual gender on stage, so that became part of the routine to take off your wig as part of the celebration. And it becomes a huge plot point, which I'm not going to divulge too much about, but it does make it a challenge for Peter when these wigs are being manhandled like that.
Yes.
So that aside, God, I don't even know how many wigs are in this show.
You know, I don't know either. I've yet to sit down and count them, because going back 19 months, it was with JBG. I just remember one night she's like, "Oh, we've got this number coming up. Do you have wigs for them?" And I went, "What?" And then I squirrel into my little closet and I would style something up and I go, "Okay, here's a new set of wigs." And she'd be like, "Okay, what can I put on them?" Because that was always the running joke between JBG and I.
Can I stick a feather on it?
Yeah, can I stick a feather on it? Or I'd be like, "How about a rhinestone clip? Can we?" And she'd go, "And a feather."
Well, Why have a rhinestone clip and no feather?
Thank you. It's,
mean,
yes,
come on.
it's the Kasha Fo, it's birdcage, birds everywhere, feathers, every scene.
But it's interesting how the color of the wigs, especially for David McBean, always go with the dress. And I mean, I don't want to talk about the specific colors if you haven't seen it out there, but it's an endless parade of glam. It's just like, it really is. But also, like, I mean, it's easy to focus on the costumes that are within the show. But other the street clothes are also fun too. The 70s beach Riviera beachwear, the George, and like how flamboyant. I mean, that's something we tried to find the balance line. How flamboyant is George on his normal day, so that you don't just have Alban trying to play it straight. You have this couple trying to play it straight.
Yes.
So it makes for more fun in the farce. But so yeah, there's maybe the rainbow stuff is a little bit anachronistic, but I don't care. They had rainbows back then, but it wasn't a symbol yet.
And I don't think we ever really hit the rainbow. I mean, that part of my joke is we do cycle in David's color of all his wigs. He does cycle through the entire color of the rainbow, but like he just said, it was, we purposely, JBG and I worked together to make sure that, the wig, and he never wears a natural color of wig except when he plays the mother. He always has, there's always some color subtly in the wig, be it a black purple or a black blue. So it was a fun challenge. I mean, JBG and I have been laughing because 19 months ago, we have a set of wigs we call the Rainbow Road wigs, and we don't know why we ever named them that.
No idea. I like Sean typed in the chat, we have very short memories in design, and there's a little bit of pandemic brain. I mean, when we got the news, so we had our first preview, and then the very next day we started getting texts, and everybody's hearing from our friends in New York, Broadway's closing, and then around town, like I think the Globe is shutting down. One of the actors is leaving and is not going to stay, and we know we had an all hands on deck meeting at 4 o'clock. And so that's when Sean came in and gathered all of us and told us, out of an abundance of caution, and we are shutting down and we're keeping things safe. And it was very odd because the theater eventually became a ghost town. I mean, Sarah, the wardrobe person, she said it was kind of like, Pompeii when you went back in a year later. Because all
the props were still left out on the tables where they were left.
Yeah.
The makeup table, it literally was like Pompeii.
Yeah.
Everything was left the way it was for a long time. We finally picked it up.
Right. But the actors grabbed their bags and left. And so all of the dressing rooms, whatever personal effects they had in the dressing rooms, were just like out on the counters, all of that. But the exception was that there's always, I would still be sewing and gluing rhinestones and whatever if I could right now. The show is open and I'm finally done. I'm told I have to stop. But
I don't really believe you, but okay.
All right, but if George's bow tie changes in the finale, you'll know. But when that happened, we thought the shutdown was going to be like 2 weeks, maybe. And I was like, okay,
what we told the cast, Broadway was saying they were opening April 15th, which was about a month later. And we told the cast we're going to reopen when Broadway reopens. And it turns out we opened before Broadway reopened.
Right.
But that was the idea. It was going to be 4 weeks, really.
Right. But I took projects home. I was like, okay, I need to add bugle beads to David's I Am What I Am dress. I'm grabbing that. I'm grabbing this bird dress. So I took home some things, and for the first couple of weeks was sewing, and my mom was staying with us during COVID. And so she's adding all these bugle beads on, and we're hand sewing. And then after a couple of weeks, it was like, wow, okay, we can put these away for a while,
Right.
like. And I see one of the questions is, was there any recasting because original actors were not available? There's four different people on the show, but the extension will have 3 more people in different roles. So
Yeah, because it's shuffling.
Yeah.
And the other thing that was interesting about that is the three Kajels that we hired to take over from the three that couldn't do the show are very, very different body types
very.
from the ones we had originally. So whereas we thought we would have costumes done, we didn't, because some of them had to be altered in a big way. Some of them had to be rebuilt. And I think the result is fantastic. I actually particularly love the look of these Kajels because each one is completely individual and pretty fantastic. The other funny story is for the curtain call, we staged it as a wedding, and the Kajels are the bridesmaids. And on our first preview, they all were wearing the same matching hideous green gingham
Awful.
farmer dresses with straw hats, just beyond hideous, as a bridesmaid's dress is supposed to be. But I think what we found out is that with the new Kajels, we didn't have any more dresses that could be altered. So we had to come up with a very clever solution. You want to share with them what that solution turned out to be?
Well, yeah, sure. 'Cause we had the 5 dresses that fit our original Kajels, and we had over dyed them. So we had dyed them green. So did this custom dye. So even if, 18 months later, that original fabric could have been brought in, or the trim or the dress or whatever, it wouldn't be the same, because then how do you, like, dyeing is a little bit like witchcraft. I mean, the spell, the potion is not going to be exactly the same the next time. So so we were a little stuck, and we had the 5 dresses from the old Kajels, and we had the 5 new Kajels, and one was just not going to fit in it. And so we were trying to figure out, like, well, do we make that person the flower girl? What do we do? And then Sean said, well, they don't have to match. And then Sarah and I thought about it, and we're like, well, if they don't have to match, then what if we use that fabric, but it is all like attuned to their specific Kajal character. So then that became us slicing, hems off and taking skirts. And we cut so much off of the other 4 girls that we ended up making 6 dresses total. So 1 for our new Kajal, and then we also then put one on Lucky as Jacob. So
it was sort of like a RuPaul challenge where each girl is given this one dress and you have to make it in your own image. So each Kajel now has the same fabric and fringe and whatever lace and crap is on those horrible dresses, but each one has now been radically altered. It's very, very funny and a very clever solution, I think.
And it's very, it was very much sort of Maria von Trapp making the clothing out of the curtains, because it was like, oh, this is the fabric I have that's available. Let me see what I can do. So it was one of those like straw into gold kind of moments. But I love the way it looks now. I think
even to the point where Dom, who plays Phaedra, he's supposed to have in the script some talent, and they never tell you what this talent is supposed to be, but it's supposed to be really awful. And what I said, Dom, that's now your job, is to come up with something really stupid and really great. And he decided to come up with a sock puppet that's shaped like a cobra that talks. And so that turned into a sock puppet, which then turned into a cobra with a little flare. Then it had eyes. Then one night it had a tongue. And then one night for the curtain call, it actually had a little green gingham bridesmaid's dress on. So I keep telling them the only thing missing is a hat, but I swear to God, it's going to show up one night.
The hat will probably happen before the run is over. Right now, it just has a bunch of ribbons on its little snake neck.
Oh, well, that's very Jerry Herman, ribbons running down its back.
There you go.
From Hello, Dolly.
It's a reference to almost getting this close to the tour of Dolly. There
That's
you go.
right. So Christopher Wren, Chris Wren, you also had the same kind of reaction when we canceled that JBG did. You stayed for a week or two finishing tweaking your light cues, and except for a couple rental pieces we had to return, the lights stayed up the whole year. And so we still had to refocus because they'd been hanging up there for a year. But one thing that I did that affected you pretty greatly, more than anybody else, was we videotaped that preview, and there were many things in it I thought, ooh, if only we could have fixed that in preview. I don't like that. That didn't, in a staging, I'm talking about staging stuff. I was able to go in and say, I can do this and fix this. And so there are places where we tweaked it, which meant that the cues in the board no longer were the cues that matched the show from 2020. And so you did have to go in and rewrite a couple of the big numbers, tweak locations a little bit. So what about what you went through to get these lights up
Yeah.
and back?
Yeah, I mean, there were a few different things. Some are kind of normal process, some are not. One thing that was kind of nice is when, and I didn't even remember that, and when you mentioned the 4 p.m. the day after, like, I don't know what time it was, but I was waiting for everyone to leave. So I thought, like, and I'm going to do some cue work because I know we're going to come back in a couple weeks. Now,
Yeah,
finally,
right.
the time that I never get, where I'm like, every night I stay until like 3 a.m. working on cue stuff after our meetings that finish at midnight or whatever, after the previews. I'm like, oh, now I can have sane hours to do this. I can come in, you know, everyone's locked down, no one knows what's going on. I'll go do some day job work, and then I'll come and have like a casual come to the theater with a glass of wine and work from like 6 to 8 and work on things like, you know, the overture and getting all those little fun little finesse cues in there. And then I had a long list for the can. Like there, because usually by first preview, we've done maybe like one run through with everything if we're lucky.
First preview was our first run through.
Right, yeah. And so, but this isn't the first show, right? We know how this works. So, and there's usually, I mean, I could pull up the can in terms of like a duplicate of the board here, but I'm assuming there's probably about 60 different looks in the can. So that's a lot of programming, and we usually don't have time during tech to do that. So obviously what I do is do a lot of videotaping, and we kind of say, oh, later we'll get to it. And some of that is those late nights during preview week. And you know,
the video that we took for you turned out to be the Rosetta Stone for us, because we filmed the whole show for you to reference, and it was the only film we had of the entire show.
Well, and actually I was the one that took that film. And the funny part is there is one chunk of it that's missing because I had put my iPad against the booth window and not realized that it wasn't fully charged, and realized at some point during the, I think, first act it died. So then I grabbed my phone really quick and put that against the booth window, and the rest was on that device.
Yeah, there's a little chunk.
So there's like 5 minutes that were missing, and I thought, no big deal, I can always get the whole thing tomorrow. So,
but thank God we had that. It was a great reference point.
It was, yeah, for the new cast and everything, and it was great. I always use it because when you're getting all those precision points in songs, it's a great way to kind of stop and start and talk with Craig about, you know, in terms of stage managing it, where those light cues go with the music bumps and all that. So it was a great reference for all that. The weirdest thing for me was, you know, unlike a big show at the Globe or Playhouse or the Opera, where, well, not the Opera, because usually that's a very short run too, but like at the Globe, you know, we document stuff like crazy. So, and you have the time to do that. Usually with the Cygnet show, there isn't really time for that. So like when I'm using all the moving lights moving around, and you know, there's a lots of different points on stage that they'll hit. And if you're doing something that's transferring to Broadway or something like that, you'll record every little part of that so you can recreate it. And that's how tours are done too. When they go to a new city, they know kind of relatively where all those points are. So we had 2 fancy moving lights that were rentals, and the dealer guy that we used in LA let us keep them for about 8 months. But then he's like, oh, we're starting to open up and do some events. We need to get those back. So I needed to go back in then and document all those things, so that when we came back with new lights, even if you hang them in the same way, they're all individuals like we are. So when someone says a line a certain way, and then another actor is playing the same role but says the line a certain different way, the lights are the same in that kind of method. So how to do some finessing there. And yeah, some lights had fallen or self-adjusted over time, like Pompeii style. So we had to go do some things in there. And then, yeah, the changes that you made, the nice part is, sure, that seems like something you subjected me to, but we always do that. And the idea of preview process is to refine our storytelling. So,
and also we're highly restricted in the time to do that. And so you have to be very selective. If you want to make a change, sometimes you just have to live with it the way it is. It's too late. But here we have the opportunity to really, I think, improve several
Oh,
sections.
yeah. I think
I hope it was an
for all of
improvement.
us, I think collectively all of us, like that weird breath and step back and thinking of other things. And for me, I did like 5 other shows during pandemic times and stuff, and just coming back to it with kind of a new hunger, as opposed to the exhaustion that you run into when you're just running tech dress previews with barely any change. Like that was nice to kind of rewind about 20 seconds back in the tape,
Right.
and then start from there, as opposed to even from like where we left off saying, oh, we're going straight into preview, which would be impossible. It was nice to rewind a little bit and have that running start. And
That was true with
and
the
it changed
acting
things.
too, because there were things in the story that I didn't feel we had fully mined out of it yet. I felt like there was more relationship with the parents that I wanted to dig into deeper. In particular, I think that was the case. I wanted the 2 gay parents to have more opportunity to really show their love for not only their kid, but for each other, that we touched on, I think, in the original, but I think in this, we had some time. We had 2 weeks to put the show back up, because remember, 3 out of 5 Cagels were brand new. They had to learn the entire show in less than 2 weeks. But it gave the actors playing the roles an opportunity to really dig down deeper. And I'm not sure, I mean, they would have got to a place that was really wonderful, but I think they've gotten to a place that's really rich. And so that time was valuable. I highly advise taking a year and a half between previews. It's a very good way to work.
Yeah, I know there were a lot of detail work pieces where I felt like, oh yeah, I would have never have gotten to it and gone to opening night and gone, oh, I forgot to do that. And I got a lot of chance to do those extra brush strokes, which was nice. So
Right.
yeah, it felt good. Yeah.
Strange.
Yeah.
Bonnie,
what so one thing I wanted to do for just a minute, because I never get to do this. I always get to show fancy lights on stage. I never get to show a light plot. But here I'm going to show everybody, just for kicks, if my share screen thing is working finally, but I'm going to try. My computer is funky at the moment. I think I'm showing, are you guys seeing a light plot?
It's saying you're starting screen sharing.
Okay. If it doesn't work, I'm going to kill it. But I just wanted to show, like, I don't think people get to see what a light plot looks like. And if it doesn't work, I will show it some other time in person. So is it still not showing?
Not for me.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Well, I don't know how my screen is also dying. I don't know. Okay, maybe I've killed it all.
Oh, you just make it up as you go along anyway.
Yeah, but anyway, the whole thing is like, it's kind of fun maybe to see that there is a whole plan, a whole map of where all these things are hung and what it looks like. And I just wanted to share that at some point. So there you go.
Yes. Yes, my Zoom lighting is, I look like I'm doing the Bohemian Rhapsody MTV video with this lighting. Someone commented on that. Bonnie, are you there? I know you're there.
I am here.
Let's talk about some of the props in the show. We made a couple changes on that.
Just a few here and there.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm late. My computer was not being very good to me. But yeah, well, the biggest surprise when I found out we were going up and Craig called and I said, well, not a big deal. We've got everything already made. We just have to go through everything and then just pop it up and we'll be fine. And then we discovered we had mice. And they ate things that weren't edible. So I don't know where their little baby carcasses are. But so it was a matter of taking everything in those boxes and taking them home and bleaching everything out. So, I didn't give the cast some sort of, virus.
Oh, no, don't do that.
No.
We survived 19 months with no virus. Let's keep it that way.
So it was interesting. It was like, okay.
And again, there were a couple things that I wanted to add to help. There's one particular joke. I'm not going to say what it is, but I'm like, can we find this particular musical instrument? Because I think this would be kind of a nice little addition here, and little tiny things here and there, but mostly everything was there.
Yeah, it was there. It was just tweaking things. And there were a
Mm.
couple new things, and you know,
Yeah, it'd be
everybody
good.
has odd musical instruments laying around their house.
Robin wants to know where you found the big nude statue. And
I
you haven't
didn't
seen it yet. It's a huge statue. It's like 6 feet tall.
I didn't bring that in.
Oh, I think Craig found it. I think it's from a school. I think we borrowed it from a school, believe it or not. It's pretty honest in its depiction. Anatomically correct statue. Maybe.
Yeah, the statue I brought in was cut, so
Yes. Yes.
we had a smaller one.
Now Keon, who I don't see his picture here, but Keon assisted me on the show, and working with him was fantastic. He had some great observations during the show. But one thing he also helped me on, and this is sort of, again, a little bit by default, but over Christmas, we filmed our one-man Christmas Carol on the set of La Cage. We asked Sean, would it be all right if we filmed it on there? And one of the ideas that we had about that the big empty ghost set is what it really was, reminded me of the plague that we went through. And doing a story about humanity and people and coming together in Christmas time and taking care of each other during a period where no one could talk to each other, no one could be around each other, that big empty theater became a metaphor for the need to come together. And so it was interesting reusing the set in a totally different way, in a totally different medium. If you get a chance to see it, I think it's really interesting to see that La Cage set used as the backdrop to a ghost story. Reminded me of Follies in a way. I mean, we could do Follies on that set too, if it were dark and dreary, and yeah, it could be awesome. But it was interesting how to take a set that was designed specifically by Sean for this specific show, and then change it. Well, we didn't change the context. The world changes context around it. And it was interesting how that same set worked in a completely different way. So if Robbie, we've been a little bit answering some of these questions as we go. Are there people who would like to ask questions of us in particular, and we can focus in on answering questions for you?
Hi, friends. If you want to put it in the Q&A function, you can do that if it's a question you maybe wanted to not sure about. Or if you want to just have us all see it, make sure you're saying to panelists and attendees in the chat, and then we will all see your question, and then they can answer it.
I have a question for Sean Murray. When are we doing Follies?
Oh my God almighty. I would do Follies in 1 second. It's just, there's no way to do a small production of that show. There literally isn't. It's a reunion of old Follies girls. So there's already a lot of people in it. And then each one of them has a ghost version. So it's double the size.
I know, I love it.
Oh my God, if I can ever afford to do that show, I'd love to do it. It's a stunning show. Where is the swan on the stage? I think that one of the challenges is to find out a scene that doesn't have a swan on the stage. Sean went a little crazy, and there's a swans all over in the drops, the costumes, the necklaces, there's swan statues.
Look for them, you'll find them.
You can't miss them. One time, Sean and I, when we did Cabaret, he put this absolutely gigantic swan on the floor. It was painted on a huge mural on the floor, maybe 8 by 6, and no one could find the swan on that set. Yeah. And it was literally the entire apron of the stage.
Just like right in front of your face.
Yes. So sometimes the bigger, the harder to find, maybe. Or any other?
I wanted to say something that we didn't get to is Peter and I, we had that really tight collaboration with wigs and makeup and hair, but one place where he was absolutely an invaluable collaborator and so generous was in the jewelry that he provided for our band throughout the show. So what Peter is wearing right now and what I am wearing are just some of the cast-offs that didn't make it into the show because there are only so many necks to go around. But Peter, could you talk about what these are and how you found them?
And Nancy and Linda, we'll get to your questions in a second.
Yeah, no, they're actually vintage. jewelry of the period. I found them, I discovered them when I was in Prague a couple years ago. And then I started hunting them on eBay and I found some really great deals on them. I mean, like JBG was saying, these are the cast-offs. The necklaces that are in the show are much more fabulous, and they all have matching earrings. Some have bracelets to go along. It became one of the most coveted things to get to wear in the show. So,
Yes.
but they are nice vintage. They're done by a company that taught Swarovski how to do their crystal. So that's why they're so wonderful and sparkly, and they're all glass. They're cut glass. So.
And they're gorgeous. Yes.
They are
yeah.
gorgeous. Yeah. In
They're
every way.
gorgeous.
In every way.
Yes.
So Nancy asked, can you explain why you said that the show is more relevant today? I feel, this is my own personal opinion, and it's the thing that informed my take on the show, that our country is becoming, it can become more judgmental. There are people who are less inclusive. There's a complete reaction to change, that there are many people in the country who don't want to see change. They don't want to embrace other people, cultures, races, lifestyles, things that are different. And it's getting more pronounced. In some cases, it's getting more violent. So the way I see it and how it makes this play relevant, like I kept telling the cast, and I don't think this is being bad in terms of skewing politically, but I said that the Din Dong character, in order to understand the stakes of what's happening in this play, would be the equivalent as if George's son was marrying Mitch McConnell's daughter. And Mitch McConnell has to go, they have to put an act on and con him to allow this marriage to happen, because he will not, he's too politically grounded in what he believes and does to allow something like that to destroy his political momentum. So we used right-wing public figures to help us treat the Din Dongs with the kind of hands off, gloves on kind of approach, because it was all about these two kids in love who want to get married. And so it's about two factions or camps, perhaps, pardon the pun, these two camps, and how they do have to eventually, because we kept saying, what happens the day after all this happens? If they pulled it off, they're eventually going to find out that this guy owned this club. So they didn't really think that part through in the story. But so that's why I think it's more relevant. It is about tolerance. It's about being able to look at a family or a situation that you don't agree with and finding the humanity in it anyway. So that's where, and that's my personal take on it. Brown bag lunches, not yet, and that's primarily because we're still trying not to do too many large gatherings. Like this is on Zoom now instead of live. It will be live again eventually. But Robbie, what is your thoughts on the brown bag?
Just like, I take it as a compliment.
Oh, I do too. I do too.
You want to hang out with us more? That's great.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure. I think it's a conversation. We almost did it for this show. We're going to talk about doing it in the spring because there's a version of it that's completely outside. So
yeah. So it's something that's. We also had a lot on our plate getting the theater reopened. There was so much maintenance that had to be done after being shut down. So it was just kind of one more thing than we could take on. But we're going to do them again.
I also have the light plot I can share from my screen if you want to circle back to Chris and you would like to talk about it.
Oh, you have it?
You're muted.
Sure, if anyone, I know, right? Zoom stuff. Yeah, I mean, sure. If anyone's interested, we can do a moment.
Want me to share my screen?
Sure, we can show someone what a couple hundred lights look like.
Awesome.
on drawing plans.
Each one has to be focused, plugged in.
Or the moving lights need to be programmed.
So
one of them, before the last.
It's a 2020, yeah.
Yeah,
2020
before, yeah, which, who knows, maybe some things have changed. But that view there is of all the lights that are up in the air overhead. One thing I do want to point out, because of the fabulous costumes and all of the choreography and all the work that needs to go backstage, A lot of dance lighting looks great in boom, like side lighting. So if you go see a traditional dance concert, you'll probably see boom, so poles that lights are mounted all the way from the ground all the way up. And those are because we're really interested in dance, in form and shape. And the best way to reveal that is backlight and side light. In this, there's no place to put them on the ground because, as everyone has seen, there's no space backstage in the house. Like it's a small theater. So we have what we call tail downs. And if you go up to the top of the drawing, you'll see there are these poles that hang from up above and then are meant to cut off just above everyone's head. So they're not perfect angles, but those are what tail downs are. Those are all for lights hanging above the actors' heads, and in most cases, their headdresses, because we don't want to get in the way of feathers.
Well, also, if you look at this, just those 4 lights are all shaped differently in the drawing. Each one represents a particular kind of light. And so when Skeeter is putting these lights up and doing the hang, this is telling him what kind of light to hang and where.
And then the numbers in there, in the circles, those are channels. So when I'm talking to the computer, when I'm programming, that's the ID where I say, oh, this light is this kind of light. I type 127. I want you to be brighter, dimmer, change your color. If it's a moving light, I tell it where I want it to go, what kind of pattern. So that's kind of the map, and I get to choose those numbers. So it's all maps in my head. And usually when I'm doing shows at Cygnet, or if I'm doing them at the Globe or at the Opera, I usually choose a lot of the patterns of numbers similarly. So when I walk into any space, I can kind of go, oh, my front lights. If I want to put light on people's faces, it's 1 through, like Grinch's 1 through 21. I know that because I've done that for 23 years. Yeah, in this case, it's 1 through 12. So for any light, and I always know downstage left is going to be channel 1. So if you look up here at the top of where he is right now, there's 1, 2, 3. Those are the front lights that light people's faces. Not those ones. Robbie, go up a little bit. Right there, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, so those are the ones that light people's faces that are at the very front of the stage. So, and they have lenses that are 26 degrees, which means that the cone of light coming out is 26 degrees. And Robbie, if you do a quick, there's 4 pages to that, but just do a quick click through. And so here's all the lights that are on the floor, including if you go down, the footlights that Sean always is great about putting in his renderings and focusing for me. You can see some of those are there. And then the next page, I'm trying to think of what's there. Oh, portals. For those of you that have seen the show, you might have seen that there was a little bit of an edit at some points. And budget comes into play, and time, and all those things. So originally the vision was to have those chasey light, cool marquee portals going all the way around. And because of various factors, aforementioned budget and time and resources, those were abridged, but they're still great. They're still
We
there.
were sad.
I had a tragic moment.
We
The
did.
pandemic hit.
I think we still ended up with a cool ode to the spirit of it, though.
Yeah.
Given what we had and what we could pull off at the time, we still have chasey lights. They still add a lot of energy to the show. And then the last page, which is the most technical in some ways and the most boring, but for me is critical, especially over stage, because Sean likes to pack scenery in there. And luckily we only did projections in 1 drop and not like 20 drops. But if you look at, this is called a section view. So it's kind of like slicing through the middle of your apple. And if you look at the left side of the drawing there, that's over stage, and you can see all the lighting positions and where they need to go and where they're relative to the portals and the flaps that move and the drapes. And this is how I figure out, okay, am I actually going to be able to get light on something, or is there scenery in the way? How high certain things are, because that changes lenses and all that. So it just gives you a quick idea of, there's a lot of math, a lot of physics that goes into the determination of what lights I'm going to use, and then compromise beyond that in terms of what does Cygnet actually have. Sometimes they don't have what I need, so what do I compromise to make it still look good? So
one of the reasons that those proscenium lights ended up being cut was, as we were moving into tech, we were so busy with tech that we didn't know what was going on in the world, that there was a virus that came over from China. We didn't know this. I didn't know this. I heard about it. But what we started to notice was that ticket sales almost stopped. Like suddenly the ticket sales for a musical normally are on they're accelerating, and they literally just tanked. and something was wrong. Something big was wrong, and we couldn't figure out what it was. Bill knew what it was, but we were too busy putting a show on to know. And Bill came into me and said, for some reason, no one is buying tickets anymore. There's everyone's, we have to be careful about spending any more money on the set. So we had to figure out how to finish the set without spending any extra money to finish all of that stuff. And it was a really hard day for us. It was a hard decision. I think it's really pretty. And Sean, you're going to love it. Looks really beautiful. But that was our first inkling that something was wrong, that something was not happening. This show that was on a trajectory to sell very well, like Cabaret did, suddenly just was tanking, and we hadn't even gone into previews yet. So that was our first clue.
Yeah, and there's a higher imperative of we were also just trying to get the show up at that point. But I sort of justified it later to myself, at least. It's like I'm the hardest critic of all of it. That this is also supposed to be sort of a well-loved, slightly low-rent club. And so if we don't have everything perfectly framed with chaser bulbs, so what? It's still elegant. The silhouette of all of it are still what I designed. And so
the preview,
maintain that.
Like the preview, we had it didn't even get finished painted. That one arch, and there was no arch on the second one. Those have all been put in now. They're all gold, and then they look pretty. They don't have lights in them, but they're really pretty. So someone was asking, maybe this could be our final question, just how are y'all doing with COVID? How did you do? How'd you get through it? Sean has a fabulous new job now, so he's a grown up now and has this big position. So everybody's gone through huge changes.
It was a tough year and a half leading up to that. I really had to rethink a lot of stuff. Being a freelance artist stopped being sustainable to me, simply because of the risk involved with that. And so the move to academia was both because I have always wanted to teach, and because suddenly I needed to come up with something else to do full time in order to continue to live here. And so the pandemic was both a curse and a blessing for me. I'll let someone else talk. JBG, what about you?
For me, I actually the night of first preview for La Cage was also opening night for me for another show I had designed, House of Joy, at the San Diego Rep, which took place in like Mughal, India. So literally between the shows, there was not a bead or rhinestone left in all of San Diego. Although Cygnet had all the feathers, they had a monopoly on the feathers. So for me, when the pandemic hit, and it was a much needed forced break for me. I, for years, have struggled to find that work-life balance. I have two sons who you may have seen coming in and out. They're now 9 and 14. So the pandemic really actually helped me sort of shift my priorities and crystallize it in a really positive way. And I found other creative outlets. So I have propagated every succulent known to humankind, and I was painting and was doing just all sorts of different things. So I kind of felt like I never stopped creating. It just was not in a theatrical venue. My father has a lot of health problems, and he's immunocompromised, and he lives in San Diego, and Legos, yes, with my kids. But my father, we are his caregivers a couple of times a week. So we didn't see anybody. We did not leave our house unless it was to go take care of my dad, or eventually to go get groceries, because we could not risk bringing anything over. So, but luckily I'm sort of a craft hoarder. So I had plenty of artsy supplies to keep me going. I made jewelry. I don't know. You can, if you want to look at my Instagram, I eventually went and like showed Like, and I was homeschooling my kids
Hmm.
pretty much because they were home the whole time. But I don't know, we exploded science experiments and we baked sourdough like everybody else. I don't know, we just got through it.
Anyone else want
I
to
took
share?
up painting.
I
took up
know you
painting.
did.
Yes, you
Yeah.
did take a painting.
Yeah. It was like the first time that I had really done that, not for theater since college. And it was kind of like rediscovering, oh, you can do this for fun also, because for so long I was like, oh, I'm taking a break from that, after work. Didn't really ever feel like doing that. And so at some point during the pandemic, we just sort of woke up and said, hey, let's just do some art. And that's
Well, we
a
started-
good awakening.
We started I can't remember if it was Actors Bazaar or Actors Market. I don't remember what we called it. It's on our website. And I started noticing how many local theater artists were doing, like you, Sean, doing paintings, and then someone commissioned you to do a painting, or JBG, like maybe your jewelry. We started noticing people were knitting or teaching yoga lessons. So we put together on our website a place where you could go and see what artists are selling in the marketplace. Cygnet, oh, there we have the link in the chat. Cygnet doesn't take a cut from anything. So if you buy something, say you buy a painting from Sean, I don't know if he's still doing it, but if he did, it all went to him. Everything went to the artist. We were just trying to help artists find a way to keep some money coming in and be creative. So yeah, no more commissions.
I don't have time.
Oh no, you're back. You're back. That's my biggest thing, was like, when we get back, I'm gonna make time, and it's almost impossible. But that's where that idea came from. And we're still there. So if you're watching and you want to go see what people might still be selling, you contact them directly through the website, and they make all the arrangements. It has nothing to do with us, except we are the liaison. So we tried to help with people. But
Well,
any more
since my
questions?
job
Anyone?
is so, divided among different theaters and stuff like that, I decided to replace both my knees.
Yeah, that's right.
So now
Yeah,
I can
new
do more
knees, that's
running
right.
around.
And now
That's
you're
good.
bionic.
No, I'm a bionic. That's what my grandchildren told me. I'm the bionic Nana.
Well, it was a long, hard year, I have to say. And it was like Robbie, Keon, Craig, Jill, Autumn, Miranda, the whole staff. I mean, we worked hard to get through it. And I couldn't be more proud of everybody for holding on. We kept saying this, hold on. Nobody knows how to get through this, so let's just see what we can do. And we also promised our subscribers and ticket holders for La Cage, please don't ask for your money back. We'll give it to you. But the first big show we're able to do after the COVID thing is lightened up will be La Cage. And we were envisioning doing 1- and 2-person shows for quite some time to half empty houses. But it turned out in June 15th, all restrictions were lifted. And so that's why we're doing La Cage right now. And thank God we're still able to continue doing it. So mysterious ways, I guess.
Do Chris and Peter want to say anything about it?
You want to join in there, Chris or Peter?
Peter, what have you been up to?
Well, the first 6 months, I literally took every wig that I had started building and finished them. So it just helped my collection. But, so often we need a wig for a show, and then the wig was cut and I'd never finished the wig. So I finished a lot of those. When a lot of theaters were starting up with doing virtual theater, be it theater on Zoom, they still needed wigs. So I was getting a lot of calls and requests for that. So it actually kept me very busy. And then now that every theater is starting back up, literally every day I'm getting an email going, would you be interested in doing our show? And I'm like, no, I've got enough on my plate. Pass it off to somebody else. So
you did a lot of really creative and kind of astounding Zoom, really weird and fabulous Zoom presentation that's at State. The Cloud9 that was just so not out of the box. It was like, didn't look like any Zoom show I'd ever seen. But I know, because we interviewed all these students, and there's all of your work there and all of their portfolios. And so that you did a lot of really interesting stuff at State.
Yeah.
Once you
Yeah,
could start
no.
doing that stuff, yeah.
It was about a year ago, everything started, because a year ago we started back up at State. They let the staff, so all of us that could put the shows together, came back in a very limited capacity. And we basically had reign of the building, and we were putting together these shows, and then the grad students and other students would come in and be part of it in a very controlled way. But it was just so fun to just be doing theater once again. And
Deb Petrie is asking if you had to develop new makeup techniques for the Zoom shows you were doing.
yes, it was less is best, because people would start and they would do like theater makeup, and you're just looking at it on Zoom because Zoom tends to wash out. So we were just looking at it going, it looks like they have a mask on. This is just wrong. It's completely wrong. And we discovered it was actually powdering your face was the best thing, because you just wanted to get rid of the shine from the lights. So
how about you, Chris? You were busy though. You were doing outdoor operas and all sorts of crazy
yeah,
things.
I'm lucky because like with my day world, I work in the world of architecture and construction, and that never slowed down. So I was designing lighting systems for theaters and churches and who knows what. But I also was very fortunate that I got to do JQA at the Rep, which was also surreal. And we had like testing for COVID 3 times a week, and there were like, you can't get near the actors, just like different zones. And then I got to light both, pandemic era operas for San Diego Opera, which was also surreal because it was in the sports arena parking lot. And I have to say, on Friday going to opening, I was so thankful that applause was not car horns, because that's what it was. It was 400 cars a night honking their horns for applause, which is really not the best. so yeah, I was really fortunate. But I think the best part was, I did like all the home improvement things and some slowdown, but I grew up a musician first, and ended up joining a band, and that we did a lot of stuff over Zoom, or Jam Kazam as it's called. It's kind of like Zoom, and it's playing more piano and guitar and drums and all those things, like just getting back more into my music, which I never have time when I'm constantly teching. So it was great to kind of revisit and get into all that. And I think even moving forward, there's that whole idea of just balancing it all out. So yeah, that's what I've been up to.
Well, thank you, everybody. It was fun. And we will see you at the theater.